The evening rush at Bellini's Italian restaurant was in full swing. The clink of silverware against fine china mixed with the low hum of conversation and occasional bursts of laughter. Sophia wiped her forehead with the back of her hand as she balanced 3 plates along her arm. 6 hours into her double shift and she still had another 4 to go. "Table 7 needs more bread," called out Rick, another server rushing past with a tray of drinks. "Got it," Sophia said, carefully setting down the steaming plates of pasta in front of an elderly couple and their adult daughter. "Can I get you anything else right now?" The older woman smiled warmly. "No, dear, this looks wonderful." Sophia nodded and headed back toward the kitchen. The grand piano in the center of the dining room caught her eye, as it always did. The beautiful instrument sat silent most nights, though occasionally the restaurant owner hired someone to play on weekends. Whenever she passed it, Sophia felt a small tug in her chest, a mixture of longing and regret that she pushed away each time. "Sophia." Her manager, Thomas, waved her over urgently. "I need to speak with you." His face looked tense and Sophia's stomach tightened. She couldn't afford to lose this job, not with her grandmother's medical bills piling up and her night classes in music education stretching her budget to the breaking point. "What's wrong?" she asked, approaching the host stand where Thomas stood reviewing reservation details. "Mr. Hughes and his party just arrived. They're in the private dining section." Thomas lowered his voice. "He specifically requested our best server. I'm giving you the table." Sophia's eyes widened. Everyone at Bellini's knew about Maxwell Hughes. The wealthy businessman owned half the real estate in the downtown area and had a reputation for being impossible to please. Servers dreaded waiting on him because one small mistake could mean a complaint to the owner. "Why me?" Sophia whispered. "Because you're my best and he tipped Paolo $300 last month when he got good service." Thomas straightened Sophia's slightly crooked name tag. "We both know you could use that money." He wasn't wrong. Sophia's grandmother needed a new medication that insurance wouldn't fully cover, and her own car was making a concerning noise she couldn't afford to have checked. "Okay," she agreed, taking a deep breath. "How many in his party?" 8 total. They're celebrating some big business deal. They've already ordered several bottles of our most expensive wine. Thomas handed her a notepad. "Don't write anything down. Hughes hates that. Says a good server should remember everything. And whatever you do, don't spill anything on him. He's wearing a suit that probably cost more than we make in 3 months." Sophia nodded, mentally preparing herself. She could do this. She had. To the private dining section was separated from the main restaurant by elegant French doors. As Sophia pushed them open, she was greeted by loud laughter and the sight of 8 well-dressed people seated around a large round table. Crystal glasses filled with deep red wine caught the light from the chandelier overhead. At the head of the table sat Maxwell Hughes. Though in his 50s, he had the confident air of someone who had been powerful his entire life. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his navy suit immaculate. He was in the middle of telling a story, his hands gesturing dramatically as the others hung on his every word. Sophia approached with a professional smile. "Good evening. My name is Sophia, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start? Anyone with some appetizers?" Hughes paused his story and looked up at her, his eyes quickly scanning her from head to toe in a way that made her feel instantly uncomfortable. Well, Thomas sent his best, did he?" "I'll certainly do my best, sir," Sophia replied, maintaining her smile despite the knot forming in her stomach. The next hour passed in a blur as Sophia hurried between the kitchen and the private dining room. The group ordered nearly everything on the menu: appetizers, salads, main courses, side dishes. They consumed the wine rapidly, growing louder with each glass. Hughes became more demanding with each course, sending back his soup for being too cold and then his replacement soup for being too hot. "Don't they teach you anything in waitress school?" he asked loudly when Sophia brought the 3rd attempt at his soup. His companions chuckled, and Sophia felt her cheeks burn. "I apologize, sir. I hope this temperature is better," she said quietly. The main courses arrived. Sophia's arms ached from carrying the heavy trays. She had missed her break and hadn't sat down in hours. Her feet throbbed in her worn-out shoes as she carefully distributed the plates around the table. Just as she was serving Hughes his veal parmesan, a woman at the table suddenly pushed her chair back without warning, bumping into Sophia. She stumbled, fighting to keep her balance, but the plate tilted. A splash of sauce landed on Hughes's sleeve, a small red stain spreading on the pristine fabric. The table went silent. "I'm so sorry," Sophia gasped, immediately grabbing a napkin and reaching toward his sleeve. Hughes jerked his arm away. "Don't touch me," he snapped, his face flushing red. "Do you have any idea how much this suit costs?" "I'm truly sorry, sir. It was an accident." Sophia looked desperately at the woman who had bumped her, but she was staring down at her plate, saying nothing. "An accident? Is that what you call incompetence these days?" Hughes's voice rose, carrying beyond the French doors into the main dining room. Heads turned. "Look what she did to my suit." Thomas appeared as if summoned by some sixth sense for restaurant disasters. "Mr. Hughes, I sincerely apologize for this unfortunate incident. We'll have your suit cleaned at our expense." Of course, Hughes wasn't listening. His eyes had narrowed, fixed on Sophia, who stood frozen, the napkin still clutched in her hand. "I've had enough of this poor service. I want her gone." Sophia's heart sank. She couldn't lose this job. Not now. "Mr. Hughes, please," Thomas began, his voice placating. "Sophia is one of our finest." "Finest?" Hughes laughed harshly. "She can't even serve a plate without wearing it. I want her fired, or I'm leaving and taking my considerable business elsewhere. Permanently." The other diners shifted uncomfortably. One woman at the table, older than the rest, with kind eyes, touched Hughes's arm. "Max, it was just an accident. Look, it's barely noticeable." But Hughes was on a roll, the wine and his natural need to display power fueling his anger. "I have standards. That's how I got where I am. People should face consequences for their mistakes." Sophia felt her throat tighten. The restaurant had fallen quiet. Even the kitchen staff had paused to watch through the serving window. Her night classes, her grandmother's care, everything flashed before her eyes. Then Hughes's gaze drifted past her, out to the main dining room, and locked onto something. His expression changed subtly. "That piano out there. Does it work?" Thomas looked confused by the sudden change of subject. "Yes, sir, it's regularly tuned." A slow, cruel smile spread across Hughes's face as he looked back at Sophia. "Well, since our waitress has ruined my dinner, perhaps she can make it up to us with some entertainment." Sophia blinked, not understanding. "You," Hughes pointed at her. "Go play that piano for us. If you entertain my guests well enough, maybe I'll reconsider having you fired." The blood drained from Sophia's face. Public humiliation. That's what he wanted. To watch her stumble through some simple tune while everyone stared. It was clear from his smirk that he assumed she couldn't play, that this would be the final embarrassment before she lost her job. What he couldn't know was that Sophia once had dreams that had nothing to do with serving pasta to wealthy businessmen. Dreams that involved stages much bigger than Bellini's dining room, and audiences who came specifically to hear her play. Thomas stepped forward. "Mr. Hughes, I don't think we can ask our staff to—" "It's all right," Sophia said quietly. Her hands had stopped shaking. Something had shifted inside her, a quiet determination replacing the fear. "I'll play." Thomas looked at her with concern. "Sophia, you don't have to do this." "Yes, I do." She handed him her serving tray. "Just one song." As she walked toward the main dining room, Sophia could feel every eye on her. Customers paused mid-bite. Conversations halted. Behind her, she heard Hughes say loudly to his guests, "This should be entertaining at least. $10 says she can barely play chopsticks." The grand piano waited for her, its polished surface gleaming under the soft lighting. It had been so long. Too long. As she approached it, memories flooded back. Recitals, competitions, late nights practicing until her fingers ached. The life she had put on hold, the talent she had hidden away. Sophia sat down on the bench, adjusted it with the familiar motion of someone who knew exactly how far to sit from the keys. She straightened her waitress uniform, took a deep breath, and placed her hands on the cool ivory. One song. One chance to remind herself of who she really was. Sophia's fingers hovered over the keys for just a moment. The restaurant had fallen completely silent. She could feel the weight of everyone's stares. The other diners, the kitchen staff peering through the service window, Thomas standing nervously by the host stand, and most of all, Maxwell Hughes, watching from the private dining room with that smug smile still plastered on his face. 10 years. It had been nearly 10 years since she had played in front of anyone besides her grandmother. 10 years since she had allowed herself to be this vulnerable. Sophia closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then her fingers touched the keys. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor filled the room. Gentle, almost questioning. It was not the simple tune anyone had expected. These opening notes spoke of something deeper, a prelude to a story told in music. As her left hand added depth with perfect chords, several diners put down their forks. A waiter stopped mid-stride, water pitcher suspended in air. For the first few measures, Sophia played tentatively, reacquainting herself with the feel of piano keys beneath her fingers. But then something shifted. The muscle memory took over, and the music began to flow from her as naturally as breathing. Her back straightened. Her face softened. Her hands moved with increasing confidence across the keyboard. The piece built gradually, like a conversation gaining momentum. The delicate opening gave way to runs of notes that rippled up and down the keyboard like water. Her right hand danced through complex passages, while her left provided the steady heartbeat of the piece. Even with the limitations of the restaurant, piano, not nearly as fine as the instruments she had once played, Sophia coaxed a remarkable sound from it. At his table, Hugh's smirk had vanished. He sat up straighter, his brow furrowed in confusion. This was not what he had expected. Not at all. The woman at his table with the kind eyes was watching Sophia with an expression of wonder, her meal forgotten. In the kitchen, the chef had stepped out to listen, spatula still in hand. Two busboys stood transfixed near the dessert station. An elderly man dining alone near the window closed his eyes, a soft smile playing on his lips as the music transported him somewhere far away. As the piece progressed, Sophia fell deeper into the music. The middle section grew more intense, her fingers flying across the keys with precision that could only come from thousands of hours of practice. Years of training at prestigious music schools, dreams that had once been within reach. The dining room disappeared around her. The stained uniform, the aching feet, the worry about rent and her grandmother's medication, all of it faded away. There was only the music now, speaking the truth she couldn't put into words. The longing, the regret, the love she still had for this art that she had been forced to abandon. In the private dining room, one of Hughes's guests whispered, "Who is she?" Hughes didn't answer. He couldn't. For perhaps the first time in years, he found himself speechless. The piece entered its most technically demanding section. Sophia's hands blurred as they crossed over each other, executing flawless runs and trills. Her body swayed slightly with the music's building emotion. A single tear slid down her cheek, but her playing never faltered. Thomas stood at the edge of the dining room, watching the transformation with amazement. The nervous, overworked waitress had vanished. In her place was an artist, commanding the attention of every person in the room through the sheer power of her talent. Outside, a couple, who had been walking past the restaurant, stopped at the sound of the music pouring through the open windows. They stood on the sidewalk, listening, holding hands a little tighter than before. Inside, a businessman who had been dining alone closed his laptop, his work emails forgotten as he became lost in the performance. A young couple on their first date, who had been struggling through awkward conversation, now sat in comfortable silence, their eyes meeting with new understanding as they shared this unexpected moment. As Sophia approached the final section of the piece, the music changed. Again. The emotional intensity built toward a climax, the harmonies growing richer, more complex. Her hands stretched to reach difficult chords that she executed with perfect precision. The music spoke of struggle, of beauty found in pain, of hopes, deferred but not forgotten. And then came the closing section, thunderous bass notes in her left hand cascading arpeggios in her right. The piece was racing toward its conclusion, and Sophia was fully alive in the music, her earlier humiliation completely forgotten. This was who she really was, who she had always been beneath the waitress uniform and the weary smile. With a final flourish, the piece ended. Sophia's hand stilled on the keys. The last notes hung in the air for a moment and then faded to silence. Complete, absolute silence. Sophia opened her eyes, suddenly aware again of where she was. The reality of the restaurant came rushing back. The tables, the half-eaten meals, the faces staring at her in shock. Embarrassment washed over her. What had she done? She had completely forgotten herself, had played as if she were back on stage at a recital, not in a restaurant where she was supposed to be serving pasta and refilling water glasses. She stood quickly, smoothing her uniform with trembling hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she wasn't sure why she was apologizing, or to whom. Then, it happened. Someone started to clap. Then another person joined in, and another. Within seconds, the entire restaurant erupted in applause. People rose to their feet, napkins still on laps, some with tears in their eyes. The applause grew louder, more insistent, filling the room with a different kind of music. "Bravo!" called an older gentleman near the window. "Incredible!" shouted someone else. Sophia stood frozen by the piano, overwhelmed by the response. This wasn't pity applause. These people were genuinely moved. Through her tears, she saw Thomas clapping wildly, his face beaming with pride and astonishment. And then her eyes drifted to the private dining room. Hughes's guests were all standing, applauding with the rest of the restaurant. All except Hughes, himself, who remained seated, his expression unreadable. As the applause continued, an older man made his way through the crowd toward Sophia. He was well-dressed, with silver hair and an elegant manner. She had noticed him dining alone earlier, though she hadn't waited on his table. "Young lady," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent she couldn't place. "That was extraordinary, truly extraordinary." "Thank you," Sophia replied softly, still overwhelmed. "I'm Victor Orlovsky." He extended his hand, which she shook automatically. "I'm the director of the City Philharmonic." Sophia's eyes widened. The City Philharmonic was renowned throughout the region. Even in her former life, she would have been honored to meet its director. "What you just played?" He shook his head in amazement. "Your technique, your expression, it's remarkable, especially considering this is hardly a concert hall, and that piano has seen better days." He smiled warmly. "May I ask where you studied?" Before Sophia could answer, she became aware of movement from the private dining room. Maxwell Hughes was walking toward them, his face flushed, his guests trailing behind him with expressions ranging from curiosity to embarrassment. "Mr. Orlovsky," Hughes said, approaching with an outstretched hand. "I had no idea you dined here. What a pleasure to meet you. I'm a major donor to the Philharmonic, you know." Orlovsky gave him a polite but brief handshake before turning his attention back to Sophia. "You were saying about your training?" Sophia swallowed hard. I studied at Juilliard for 3 years." Gasps and murmurs spread through the nearby tables. Juilliard was a name even non-musicians recognized, one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. "And you're working here as a waitress?" Orlovsky asked, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. Hughes shifted uncomfortably beside them, suddenly aware that his attempt to humiliate this woman had backfired spectacularly. The waitress he had tried to embarrass was a classically trained pianist from one of the most elite music institutions in the country. "Life happened," Sophia said simply, not wanting to get into the details of her mother's illness, the depleted savings, the hard choices she had been forced to make. "I had to leave before graduating." Orlovsky nodded thoughtfully. "Well, Ms. Rodriguez. Sophia Rodriguez. Ms. Rodriguez, talent like yours shouldn't be serving dinner. It should be shared with the world." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a business card. "We're holding auditions next week for our upcoming concert series. I would very much like you to come play for us." "Officially?" Sophia stared at the card in disbelief. "You want me to audition? For the Philharmonic?" "Based on what I just heard, I'd hire you on the spot, but protocol is protocol." He smiled again. "Will you come?" Behind Orlovsky, Hughes stood awkwardly, the red sauce stain on his sleeve now seeming insignificant compared to the stain on his character this evening had revealed. Sophia took the card with a trembling hand. "Yes," she whispered. Then stronger. "Yes, I will. Thank you." As Orlovsky returned to his table and the other diners reluctantly went back to their meals, still buzzing with excitement about what they had witnessed, Sophia turned to face Hughes. For a long moment they simply looked at each other, the powerful businessman and the waitress he had tried to break. But something had shifted in the balance of power between them. Sophia stood taller now, her eyes steady as they met his. Hughes opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. What could he possibly say? Without a word, he turned and walked back to the private dining room, his shoulders slightly slumped, his moment of cruelty transformed into an unexpected opportunity for the very person he had tried to hurt. Thomas approached Sophia, still looking stunned. "That was... I don't even have words." He shook his head in amazement. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone you could play like that?" Sophia looked down at the business card in her hand, then back at the piano that had just changed the course of her life. "No one ever asked," she said softly. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Sophia returned to her tables, continuing to serve as if she hadn't just turned the entire restaurant upside down with her playing, but everything had changed. Customers looked at her differently now, with respect, curiosity, even awe. They smiled warmly when she approached their tables. A few asked quiet questions about her music background, which she answered briefly, still processing what had happened. Maxwell Hughes and his party finished their meal in relative silence. When it came time to pay, he handed Sophia his credit card without meeting her eyes. She returned with the receipt, placing it discreetly beside him. "Will there be anything else, sir?" she asked, her voice steady. Hughes finally looked up at her. The arrogance was gone from his face, replaced by something that might have been shame, though he was clearly unaccustomed to the feeling. "No," he said quietly. Then, almost under his breath, "That was impressive." Coming from him, it was as close to an apology as she was likely to get. Sophia simply nodded and walked away. She didn't need his validation anymore. As the last customers trickled out around midnight, Sophia found herself sitting alone at the bar, still in her uniform, staring at Victor Orlovsky's business card. The restaurant owner, Antonio Bellini, had arrived shortly after her performance, alerted by several staff members calling and texting about the extraordinary event that had unfolded in his establishment. "There she is," Antonio said, approaching, with 2 glasses of wine. He set one in front of her and took the seat beside her. "My secret weapon, a piano virtuoso disguised as a waitress." Sophia smiled tiredly. "Hardly a virtuoso anymore. I haven't seriously practiced in years." "Could have fooled me," Antonio replied, taking a sip of his wine. "Could have fooled Orlovsky too, from what I hear. The man doesn't impress easily." Sophia turned the business card over in her fingers. "It doesn't feel real." "But it is." Antonio gestured to the piano, which sat silent again in the center of the now empty dining room. "You know, I've owned that piano for 15 years. Bought it when I first opened this place. I wanted live music to be part of the experience here." He chuckled softly. "Never once did I imagine the best performance it would ever see would come from one of my own staff." "I don't know if I can do it," Sophia said, finally voicing the fear that had been growing since Orlovsky handed her his card. "The audition? It's been so long and I've been away from that world. Those people train constantly. Those people don't have what you have." Antonio interrupted gently. "And what's that?" "Heart," he said simply. "Anyone with technical training can hit the right notes. But what you did tonight, That was more than notes. Everyone felt it. He looked at her seriously. You play like someone who's known loss. Who's had to fight? That can't be taught, Sophia. Sophia felt tears welling up again. I don't even have time to practice. Between double shifts here and taking care of my grandmother. About that, Antonio cut in. I have a proposition for you. She looked at him questioningly. I need a regular pianist here. Weekend evenings to start. If tonight was any indication, you'll draw a crowd. He smiled. The pay would be better than what you make waiting tables, and the hours would be fewer. That would give you time to practice. For your audition. Sophia stared at him in disbelief. You're offering me a job as a pianist just like that? Just like that, Antonio confirmed. Though it wasn't really just like that. You've worked hard here for 2 years. You've never complained, never called in sick, never given me any reason to doubt your work ethic. And now I find out you're essentially a musical prodigy? He laughed. I'd be a fool to let you just keep serving pasta. For the first time since her mother's illness had derailed her life, Sophia felt a tiny spark of hope that perhaps her old dreams weren't completely out of reach. I don't know what to say, Antonio. Say yes, he replied. And then go home and start practicing. You have an audition to prepare for. The next morning, Sophia woke early despite having fallen into bed just a few hours before. She made coffee and sat at her small kitchen table, Orlovsky's card propped against the sugar bowl. Her tiny apartment was in an old building with thin walls, which meant she couldn't practice piano at home without disturbing the neighbors. But Antonio had told her she could come use the restaurant's piano during the morning hours before they opened for lunch. Her grandmother shuffled into the kitchen, her slippers whispering against the linoleum floor. At 78, Elena Rodriguez moved slowly, but her mind remained sharp. She poured herself coffee and eased into the chair across from Sophia. You came home very late, Elena observed, adding sugar to her cup. Everything okay at work? Sophia hadn't had a chance to tell her grandmother about the previous night's events. Now, as she recounted what had happened, the spilled sauce, Hughes's cruelty, the unexpected turn of events with her performance and Orlovsky's offer, Elena's eyes grew wider. When Sophia finished, Elena reached across the table and took her granddaughter's hand. Your mother is smiling down on you right now, she said softly. She always said your music would find its way back to you. I'm scared, Abuela, Sophia admitted. What if I'm not good enough anymore? What if I've lost too much time? Elena squeezed her hand. The music has always been inside you. It never left. And now perhaps the time is finally right for the world to hear it again. After breakfast, Sophia kissed her grandmother goodbye and headed to Bellini's. The restaurant was quiet. In the morning light, chairs still upturned on tables from the night before, Antonio nodded to her from where he was checking inventory at the bar and pointed to the piano. All yours until 11, he said. I had it tuned this morning. Sophia set her bag down and approached the instrument with a mixture of reverence and trepidation. In the harsh morning light without the dimmed evening ambiance, it looked older, the black lacquer showing wear along the edges. But when she sat and played a few experimental notes, the sound was indeed clearer, more resonant than the night before. She began with scales, basic exercises she had once performed daily as a student. Her fingers felt stiff at first, out of practice, but gradually, the familiar patterns came back to her. Up and down the keyboard, major and minor scales, arpeggios, chord progressions, the building blocks of classical technique. After warming up, she turned to the piece she planned to play for her audition, Chopin's Ballade No. 1, the same piece she had performed the night before. But this time she approached it differently, with a critical ear. She broke it down into sections, working slowly through the difficult passages, no longer playing from pure emotion but with careful attention to detail. As she worked, memories flooded back. Her mother sitting beside her on the bench when she was just 6 years old, guiding her small hands over the keys. Her first recital at 8, wearing a blue dress with a satin ribbon. The nerve-wracking Juilliard audition at 17, the countless hours in practice rooms during her 3 years there. The pain came back too. Her mother's diagnosis during her junior year, the mounting medical bills, the impossible choice between continuing her education and helping her family. The day she had packed up her dorm room and said goodbye to her professors and classmates, explaining that she had to withdraw. For 2 hours, Sophia practiced intensely, losing track of time as she immersed herself in the music. When she finally stopped, her fingers aching pleasantly from the workout, she was startled to find she wasn't alone. Thomas, her manager from the night before, was sitting at a nearby table listening. "Sorry," he said when she noticed him. "I didn't want to interrupt, I just came in early to do some paperwork and heard you playing." "How long have you been sitting there?" Sophia asked, embarrassed that someone had been watching her practice session with all its mistakes and repetitions. "About 20 minutes, Thomas admitted. "You really are incredible, you know. And I've been your manager for 2 years and had no idea." He shook his head in disbelief. "Why didn't you ever mention your background?" Sophia closed the piano lid gently. "What was I supposed to say? Hi, I'm Sophia. I used to be a promising pianist at Juilliard, but now I'm serving breadsticks." "Fair point," Thomas conceded. "But still, all those times we talked about music, and you never said anything. It was too painful," Sophia said quietly. "Talking about it just reminded me of everything I'd lost. It was easier to just put it away." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "Well, I'm glad Hughes forced you to play, as awful as his intentions were. The world deserves to hear you, Sophia." As if summoned by the mention of his name, the front door of the restaurant opened and Maxwell Hughes himself walked in. He stopped short when he saw Sophia at the piano. "We're not open yet, sir," Thomas said, rising from his chair. "I know," Hughes replied, his tone lacking the imperious edge from the previous night. "I'm not here to eat, I came to speak with Ms. Rodriguez." Sophia and Thomas exchanged surprised glances. "It's okay," Sophia told Thomas. "I'll talk to him." Thomas nodded and retreated to the office, leaving Sophia alone with the man who had tried to humiliate her just hours before. Hughes approached the piano but maintained a respectful distance. He looked different in the daylight, smaller somehow, less intimidating. He carried a large envelope in his hands. "I owe you an apology," he said, getting straight to the point. "My behavior last night was inexcusable." Sophia didn't make it easy for him. She simply waited, watching him struggle to find the right words, perhaps for the first time in his life. "I came to make amends," he continued, holding out the envelope. "And to offer you this." Sophia made no move to take it. "What is it?" Hughes set the envelope on top of the piano. "It's a check for your grandmother's medical expenses. Thomas mentioned she was ill." Sophia's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed. With suspicion. "Why would you do that?" Hughes looked away, out the window at the quiet morning street. "Let's just say your performance last night reminded me of something I'd forgotten, something important." He turned back to her. "Not everything has a price tag, Ms. Rodriguez. Some things are priceless." With that, he turned and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he paused and looked back at her. "I'll be watching for your name in concert programs," he said, and then he was gone. Sophia stared at the envelope on the piano, unsure what to make of this unexpected turn of events. Slowly, she reached for it, feeling the weight of possibility in her hands. The week leading up to Sophia's audition passed in a whirlwind. By day, she practiced relentlessly on the restaurant's piano, breaking down the Chopin piece measure by measure until her fingers could navigate the most challenging passages with confidence. By night, she performed for Bellini's dinner guests who now came as much for the music as for the food. Word had spread quickly about the waitress with the extraordinary talent. Local news had even picked up the story. From serving tables to serving music, Waitress stuns diners with hidden talent. Antonio had framed the newspaper article and hung it proudly by the entrance. The restaurant was packed every night. with patrons requesting specific pieces. Sophia built a repertoire of crowd pleasers, some Chopin, of course, but also Debussy, Beethoven, and even some modern film scores that diners recognized. Between sets, she would walk among the tables, accepting compliments with a shy smile that was gradually becoming more confident. On Friday afternoon, her final practice session before Saturday's audition was interrupted by the arrival of a delivery man carrying a large white box. "Delivery for Sofia Rodriguez," he announced, setting it carefully on a nearby table. "That's me," Sophia said, puzzled. She hadn't ordered anything. She opened the card attached to the box first. "For tomorrow. Every performer deserves to feel as extraordinary as their music. Antonio and the Bellini staff." Sophia lifted the lid to find a beautiful dress in deep blue, simple but elegant, with a handwritten note pinned to the fabric. The color of music. Tears sprang to her eyes. She hadn't even thought about what she would wear to the audition. All her focus had been on the music itself. "Do you like it?" Antonio asked, appearing from the kitchen with Thomas and two of the other servers. "It's beautiful," Sophia whispered. "But you've already done so much." "It was everyone's idea," Thomas cut in. "We all chipped in. Even the kitchen staff." "We believe in you," Antonio said simply. "We want you to walk into that audition tomorrow knowing you have a whole restaurant full of people behind you." Sophia hugged each of them, too overwhelmed to find the right words. 6 months ago, these people had just been co-workers. Now they felt like family. When she returned home that evening, Sophia found her grandmother sitting with an unexpected visitor, Dr. Patel, who had been treating Elena's heart condition for the past 3 years. "Dr. Patel was just explaining about the new medication," Elena said, her eyes bright with excitement. "The one we couldn't afford before." The doctor smiled warmly at Sophia. "It's already making a difference. Your grandmother's test results show significant improvement since we started the new treatment last week." Last week? Right after Hughes had left that envelope on the piano, Sophia had initially been suspicious of his motives, but her grandmother's needs had outweighed her pride. The check had been substantial, enough to cover months of the specialized medication and follow-up care that insurance wouldn't pay for. "That's wonderful news," Sophia said, setting down her bag. "How are you feeling, Abuela?" "Like I could dance the tango again," Elena replied with a mischievous smile. "Maybe not today, but soon." After the doctor left, Sophia prepared a simple dinner while Elena set the table. They ate together, as they had every evening since Sophia's mother had passed away 5 years earlier. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" Elena asked, serving herself another small portion of rice. Sophia considered the question carefully. "Yes and no. The music is ready. I've practiced until I can play it in my sleep." She twirled her fork thoughtfully. "But it's been so long since I've been in that world, the classical music world. It can be intense." Elena nodded. "Your mother always said it was like swimming with sharks sometimes. Beautiful, graceful sharks who can play Rachmaninoff perfectly." Sophia agreed with a small laugh. "And now you're jumping back into that pool." Elena reached across the table and took her granddaughter's hand. "But you're ready, mi vida. You've always been ready. Life just had other plans for a while." That night, Sophia couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her fingers moving silently through the motions of the piece. Every note, every dynamic marking, every tempo change. She reviewed it all in her mind. Around 3 a.m, she gave up on sleep and slipped out of bed. In the small living room, she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and pulled out an old photo album. She hadn't looked at these pictures in years. They had been too painful. There she was at her first recital, missing her 2 front teeth but beaming with pride. There was her mother beside her at the piano, both of them laughing at some forgotten joke. There she was as a teenager, serious-faced before a competition, her hair pulled back severely. And finally, the photo that brought the sharpest pang, Sophia standing in front of Juilliard on her first day, looking terrified but thrilled. The world of music stretched out before her like an endless symphony. I'm trying, Mom, she whispered to the photograph. I'm really trying. The city concert hall was an imposing building with massive columns and wide stone steps leading to heavy bronze doors. Sophia climbed those steps slowly the next morning, the blue dress from Antonio and the staff hidden beneath her coat. Her grandmother had insisted on coming along for moral support, but was meeting her inside after Sophia registered. The lobby was buzzing with activity. Young musicians clutched instrument cases, paced nervously, or sat with scores open on their laps, lips moving silently as they reviewed passages. Sophia felt like an imposter among them. They all seemed so young, so polished, so current. She had been away from this world for 7 years. What made her think she could step back in as if she'd never left? She checked in at a registration desk where a young man with glasses handed her a number 37 and directed her to a practice room where she could warm up. You'll be called when it's your turn, he explained. The audition committee will ask you to perform your prepared piece. They may stop you at any point or ask you to skip to a different section, so be prepared for that. Sophia nodded, all too familiar with the process from her student days. Nothing said, "We've heard enough," quite like being cut off mid-phrase. The practice room was small but well-equipped with an upright piano that had seen better days. Sophia removed her coat, smoothed the blue dress, and sat down to warm up. Basic scales at first, then arpeggios, her fingers finding their familiar patterns. The door opened, and Elena slipped in quietly, sitting in a chair in the corner. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Like I might throw up," Sophia admitted, continuing her warm-up exercises without missing a note. "That's how your mother felt before every performance, too," Elena said with a small smile. And then she would walk on stage and become someone else entirely, someone who belonged there. Sophia nodded, trying to find that person inside herself, the performer who had once dreamed of concert halls and symphony orchestras. She was in there somewhere, buried beneath years of serving pasta and worrying about bills. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. A woman with a clipboard poked her head in. "Number 37? They're ready for you." Sophia's heart leaped into her throat. This was it. She stood, smoothed her dress one more time, and hugged her grandmother tightly. "Remember who you are," Elena whispered. "Remember where you come from." Sophia followed the woman down a long hallway to the stage door of the small auditorium, where the auditions were being held. Through the small window in the door, she could see a panel of 5 people sitting at a table, the audition committee. Victor Orlovsky sat in the center, his silver hair catching the light. "You can go in now," the woman with the clipboard said. "Good luck." Sophia took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The stage lights were bright, making it difficult to see beyond the first few rows of empty seats. She walked to the grand piano at center stage, a magnificent Steinway that made Bellini's piano look like a toy in comparison. She stood beside it and addressed the committee. "Good morning. My name is Sofia Rodriguez. I'll be playing Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor." "Ms. Rodriguez," Orlovsky acknowledged with a nod. "Before you begin, the committee understands you were once a student at Juilliard, but did not complete your degree. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir. I completed 3 years before having to withdraw for family reasons." Another committee member, an older woman with glasses, looked up from her notes. "And you've been working as a waitress since then, with no professional musical engagements?" The question stung, but Sophia kept her voice steady. "Yes, that's correct. I've only recently returned to performing." The woman made a note, her expression neutral. Sophia couldn't tell if this information counted against her or not. "Whenever you're ready, Ms. Rodriguez," Orlovsky said, gesturing to the piano. Sophia sat down, adjusting the bench to the right height. She placed her hands on the keys, feeling the perfect weight and response of the Steinway, so different from the restaurant piano she'd been practicing on. She closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. In that moment of darkness, faces flashed through her mind. Her mother, her grandmother, Antonio, Thomas, the staff at Bellini's, even Maxwell Hughes. All the threads of her life that had led her to this stage, This moment, Sophia opened her eyes and began to play. The sound that emerged from the Steinway was rich and full, filling the auditorium with the opening notes of Chopin's masterpiece. The acoustic properties of the concert space amplified every nuance, every subtle dynamic change. It was like having wings after walking for years. Sophia's initial nervousness melted away as she surrendered to the music. Her fingers moved with precision and passion across the keyboard, finding depths in the piece that even she hadn't fully explored in her practice sessions. As she approached the technically demanding middle section, she could feel the committee's attention intensify. This was where many pianists faltered. Sophia took a breath and plunged in, her hands a blur as they executed the complex passages. Every note was clear, every phrase shaped with intention. She was no longer thinking about technique or memorization. She was telling a story through the music, her story, the loss, the struggle, the unexpected second chance. The music spoke of resilience and hope in the face of setbacks, of beauty that refuses to be silenced. As she reached the final crescendo, building toward the piece's powerful conclusion, Sophia felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the pure joy of making music not just for herself, but for others. This was why she had fallen in love with the piano in the first place. This feeling of connection, of expressing what words could never capture. With the final resounding chord, Sophia's hands lifted from the keys. The sound hung in the air for a moment, then faded to silence. She looked up at the committee, waiting for their response, her heart pounding in her chest. For a moment that felt like eternity, the auditorium remained silent. Sophia's hands rested in her lap as she waited, heart pounding. The 5 faces of the committee revealed nothing as they scribbled notes. Finally, Orlovsky looked up. "Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez." That was it. No feedback, no indication of whether they had loved or hated her performance. Just, "Thank you," the standard response given to every auditioner. "The committee will deliberate, and results will be posted this afternoon," the woman with glasses added, not unkindly. Sophia stood, gave a small bow as was customary, and walked off the stage on legs that felt like water. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried her through the performance was ebbing away, leaving her drained. Elena was waiting in the lobby, and her face lit up when she saw Sophia. "Well, how did it go?" "I played well," Sophia said, thinking it through. "Better than I have in years, maybe ever, but I couldn't read their reactions at all." "That's how these things go," Elena reassured her, linking her arm through her granddaughter's. "Your mother used to say that audition committees were trained to have poker faces. They decided to get lunch at a small cafe across from the concert hall while they waited for the results." Sophia picked at her sandwich, too nervous to eat much. She kept checking her phone for the time. "What happens if I don't get in?" she asked suddenly. Elena looked up from her soup. "Then you keep playing at Bellini's. You find other opportunities. You don't give up." She reached across the table and squeezed Sophia's hand. "But you will get in. How can you be so sure?" "Because I know what talent sounds like," Elena replied. "I lived with your mother for 40 years, remember? And you have what she had. That special something that makes people stop and listen." After lunch, they returned to the concert hall, where a small crowd had gathered near the bulletin board in the lobby. Results were being posted. Sophia hung back, suddenly afraid to look. What if her name wasn't there? What if the committee had seen right through her, recognizing her as an imposter, a waitress playing dress-up in a concert gown? "Do you want me to check?" Elena offered. Sophia shook her head. "No, I should do it." She approached the bulletin, bored as several other auditioners moved away, some with disappointed faces, others trying to contain their excitement. Taking a deep breath, she scanned the list of names. There it was, halfway down the page. Sophia Rodriguez, Chopin's Ballade No. 1, selected for Spring Concert Series. She read it 3 times to be sure she wasn't imagining it. Then she turned to her grandmother, who was watching her face anxiously. "I got in," Sophia whispered, and then louder, "I got in." Elena rushed forward to embrace her, both of them laughing and crying at once. Other auditioners glanced their way, some with understanding smiles, others with the tight expressions of those who hadn't made the cut. "Your mother is dancing in heaven right now," Elena said, wiping tears from her cheeks. A tap on Sophia's shoulder made her turn. Victor Orlovsky stood there, smiling warmly. "Congratulations, Ms. Rodriguez," he said, extending his hand. "Your performance was exceptional." "Thank you," Sophia replied, shaking his hand. I'm honored to be selected." "The committee was particularly impressed with your interpretation," Orlovsky continued. "Technical skill is something we see often. Emotional depth like yours is much rarer." He glanced at Elena. "And this must be your grandmother? The family emergency that took you away from Juilliard?" "Yes," Sophia said. "This is Elena Rodriguez, my grandmother and my biggest supporter." Elena beamed as she shook the director's hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Orlovsky. Thank you for giving my granddaughter this opportunity." "Talent like hers shouldn't be hidden away," Orlovsky replied. He turned back to Sophia. "There will be a meeting for all selected musicians next week to discuss the program and rehearsal schedule. In the meantime, the committee had a specific request." "Yes?" Sophia asked, suddenly nervous again. "We'd like you to consider expanding your repertoire for the concert series. Your Chopin is magnificent, but we believe you could handle something even more challenging." He handed her a folder. "Perhaps some Rachmaninoff? His Piano Concerto No. 2 would suit your playing style beautifully." Sophia accepted the folder with wide eyes. Rachmaninoff's second was legendary for its difficulty and its beauty. It was a piece she had dreamed of playing someday, but never thought she'd have the opportunity. "This is a lot to take on," she said honestly. "You have 3 months to prepare," Orlovsky said, "and we'll provide access to our practice facilities. The Philharmonic would accompany you, of course." He smiled at her stunned expression. "Think about it. Let me know next week." After he walked away, Sophia opened the folder to find the full score for the concerto, along with a handwritten note from the committee praising specific aspects of her audition. Words like exceptional phrasing, remarkable technical facility, and deeply moving interpretation jumped out at her. "I need to sit down," she murmured. News of Sophia's acceptance into the Philharmonic's concert series spread quickly. By the time she arrived at Bellini's that evening for her regular performance, Antonio had placed a small reserved sign on the piano bench, and a bottle of champagne was chilling nearby. "Our star has arrived," he called out when she walked in. The entire staff erupted in applause, and Sophia found herself blushing as they surrounded her with hugs and congratulations. "I wouldn't be here without all of you," she told them truthfully. "Especially you, Antonio, for giving me the chance to play again. And especially Maxwell Hughes for being such a jerk," Thomas added with a grin. "We should send him a thank you note." Everyone laughed, but Sophia found herself nodding thoughtfully. "You know, in a strange way, we really should thank him. If he hadn't tried to humiliate me that night." She shook her head, still amazed at how one cruel moment had somehow changed the entire course of her life. That evening, as she played for the restaurant patrons, Sophia felt a new confidence in her performance. These weren't just pleasant background tunes anymore. This was practice for her future, for the concerts and opportunities that now stretched before her. Between sets, a familiar face appeared at her piano. The older woman from Hughes's party, the one with kind eyes who had tried to intervene when he was berating Sophia. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by," the woman said. "I'm Louise Hughes, Maxwell's sister." Sophia's surprise must have shown on her face. "Yes, I know," Louise said with a small laugh. "Hard to believe we're related. I wanted to apologize again for my brother's behavior that night, and to tell you that your playing changed something in him." "Changed him how?" Sophia asked, curious, despite herself. "It's hard to explain," Louise replied. "Max has always defined everything by its monetary value. Success, art, people. It all had a price tag in his mind." She smiled softly. "But your music that night, I watched his face when you played. It was like he was hearing something he couldn't buy, couldn't control, couldn't put a price on. It shook him. Sophia didn't know what to say to that. Anyway, Louise continued, I thought you might like to know that he's made a substantial donation to the city's youth music program. Anonymous, of course, but... She shrugged. People can surprise you. After Louise left, Sophia sat quietly, at the piano thinking about how strangely life works sometimes. A moment meant to break her had instead rebuilt her. A cruel act had somehow led to a kind one. 6 months later, Sophia stood backstage at the city concert hall, no longer as an auditioner, but as a featured soloist. She peeked through the curtain at the packed auditorium. Her grandmother was in, the front row beside Antonio and several staff members from Bellini's. And there, a few rows back, sat Maxwell Hughes with his sister Louise. Sophia wore a new dress for this performance, deep blue like the one her restaurant family had given her, but designed specifically for the concert stage. Her hair was styled elegantly, and she looked every inch the professional pianist she had once again become. As she waited for her cue, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. The 7 years away from music that had felt like failure, but had actually given her life experiences that deepened her playing. The night a cruel man had tried to use her passion to humiliate her, never suspecting that it would instead elevate her. The stage manager nodded to her. It was time. Sophia walked onto the stage to enthusiastic applause. The grand piano gleamed under the lights, the orchestra seated behind it. She bowed to the audience, then to Orlovsky, who stood on the conductor's podium. Taking her seat at the piano, she placed her hands on the keys and looked up for the conductor's signal. In that moment, she felt a perfect clarity. This was where she belonged. Not because she had been born with talent, though she had. Not because she had studied at a prestigious school, though she had. But because she had lost music and found it again. Because she understood now that true artistry wasn't about perfection. It was about resilience. About playing through the pain and the joy and everything in between. Orlovsky raised his baton. The orchestra began the famous opening chords of Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto. Sophia took a deep breath and joined them, her fingers finding the keys with confidence and passion. As the music soared through the concert hall, she caught her grandmother's eye in the front row. Elena was crying, but her face shone with pride and joy. Beside her, Antonio and the Bellini staff watched in wonder as their former waitress commanded the stage. And somewhere in the audience, a man who had once seen her as nothing more than a server to be belittled was listening, truly listening, perhaps for the first time in his life. Sophia smiled and gave herself completely to the music, letting it carry her forward into a future she had once thought lost. A future that had always been waiting for her to find her way back to it. Sometimes, she realized, the most beautiful symphonies are the ones that begin with a discordant note. And sometimes the cruelest moments can lead to the most unexpected harmonies.